to finding out.
You're Poppy's angel. Come to save us.
Hey guys, Super Rockstar here, and welcome to another Poppy Playtime theory video. In this video, we're going to be answering one of the biggest mysteries in Poppy Playtime. That mystery being, who is our player? Since the release of Poppy Playtime, we've slowly been receiving hints about our character's identity throughout the various chapters, including the latest installment, Chapter 3. Throughout the progression of the story, we never see our character's appearance, nor do we know their age or gender. However, we do know that our player is an ex-employee of Playtime Co., and that their role was involved with the company's experiments. So, in order for us to figure out our player's identity, their role, and understanding of their character, we need to turn our attention to one of the playcare's locations, Home Sweet Home. While making our way throughout this location, we walk through Catnap's red smoke, which causes us to hallucinate. Continuing onwards in Home Sweet Home, we encounter several phrases. These phrases are happy and fun, why was it done, nowhere is more haunted than the mind, guilt haunts you, and there is no safety here. Let's analyze these phrases. Start off with the first phrase, happy and fun, why was it done? This phrase has several meanings. The first one being that our player was searching for answers as to why the experiments, tests, and torture were taking place in Playtime Co. For the second meaning, this phrase could act as a question that our player is imagining that the tortured children that were used for the experiments would constantly ask, having fun and laughing only to be used in the experiments that would partake in the factory. What's interesting is that this phrase appears more than once. This means that this phrase is constantly being cycled over and over again in our player's mind, acting as a reminder that the actions that our player committed will never be forgiven. Let's move on to our second phrase, nowhere is more haunted than the mind. This phrase may refer to the haunting memories triggered as we traverse the factory, memories that will never be forgotten. Now let's move on to our third phrase, guilt haunts you. This one speaks for itself. Whatever our player has done in the past was really bad and they couldn't live with it. The only way that the player could make it right and fix everything was to return to the factory. This relates back to the letter that our player received back in chapter 1, which says, everyone thinks that the staff disappeared 10 years ago. We're still here. Find the flower. So we return to the factory to not only find the player's co-workers, but our return is seen as a chance to atone for the terrible actions that we've committed. This phrase appears once again in this room that we find while progressing throughout the halls of Home Sweet Home. We'll briefly touch up on this room later. Finally, we have our last phrase, there is no safety here. This phrase insinuates that the player is neither mentally nor physically safe within the factory. Now, let's elaborate on the room that we talked about earlier. It's been theorized that this office belonged to our player who used to work in it. However, we cannot enter the office. The only thing we can do is observe it. That office most likely serves as a haunted reminder to our player that what has happened in the past can never be changed or altered. So, if this office did belong to our player, this would mean that their job was closely involved with the children and the experiments. This is evidenced by the time where we make our way to the counselor's office, and while progressing through it, we get attacked by Catnap, upon which we start to go through a hallucination in which we see the children in Home Sweet Home, the school, the playhouse, and the counselor's office. So now you're probably asking, what was our job exactly? Many people have already theorized that the player is the head of production. In chapter 2, after Poppy gets taken away by Mommy Longlegs, we pursue them through a dark tunnel. After exiting it, we see that there are 5 higher up tunnels. Each one has the name of an important employee. These names are Eddie MMR, Leaf Pier, Elliot Ludwig, Stella Graber, and the 5th unknown name. There has been speculation that the tunnel with the following letters has our player's name. The question is, what is our player's name? We'll elaborate on this later. When it comes to the position of head of production, it involves someone who is in charge of controlling and planning all processes within manufacturing. In this case for Playtime Co., this will relate to the toy development process, and that this process could be linked with the kids being used in experiments involving the Bigger Bodies initiative. This role will fit our character well considering that we're really good at using a Grat Pack. We could even say that we helped develop this product for the company. Although this seems plausible, this does raise another important question. If we were the head of production, how come our office is located within Home Sweet Home? Perhaps before we became the head of production, we used to work as a researcher for the company. There are many hints towards this being the case. In order to explain how our player went from being a researcher to the head of production, we need to head back to Home Sweet Home. After acquiring the gas mask, we need to find several batteries in order to power up the generator within Home Sweet Home. When we acquire the last battery, we see a few rooms that have observation mirrors. These mirrors offer a one-way vision that effectively provides unobtrusive monitoring. As a researcher, our player will be able to observe the orphans and their behaviors in order to acquire data. This is also evidenced in chapter 2, where when we play the various games scheme set up by Mommy Longlegs, observation rooms are clearly visible. We also break into one of these observation rooms during the statue's game near the end of chapter 2. Once again, our player most likely will use these rooms to acquire data and afterwards send it to the higher-ups. Our player believes that their data will be used to help the children within the factory. Unknowingly, it would be used to select the best candidates for the Bigger Bodies initiative and other experiments. After several successful experiments were created thanks to the data that our player has collected, Playtime Co. will recognize our competent evaluations, and considering the high success rate of the Bigger Bodies initiative, we would be promoted to the head of production. As the head of production, we gain high-level clearance to files that were restricted back when we were just a researcher. This is when our player will discover the true nature of the Bigger Bodies initiative, and seeing how we unknowingly sealed the fates of many orphans, we begin to regret our actions. We then can't bring ourselves to stay with the company, and thus our player quits and leaves the factory. Little did they know that their decision would save their life from an event that would take the lives of so many others. That event became known as the Hour of Joy. Although our player lived, there is something that we need to touch base on. When we were attacked by Catnap in the counselor's office, we began to hallucinate past events that we partook in. At the end of the hallucination, we're in the area where Huggy Wuggy would be standing, but he isn't there. Everything is bathed in red light, and we can hear emergency sirens and screaming. While this is happening, we can see the prototype's hand emerge from the red smoke. Right now, our player is currently experiencing a moment in the Hour of Joy. So, if our player wasn't present during this event, why do we see this moment during the hallucination? Especially since at the end of chapter 3, Poppy showing us the Hour of Joy VHS tape is supposed to be a big reveal. This would be the first time we've seen this tape, meaning that the player will have no knowledge about the event. Well, we have to remember that these hallucinations are based on a person's memories of the past. In order to properly understand our briefly stated question, we once again need to turn our attention back to Home Sweet Home. While progressing throughout the halls of this place, we come across a radio playing a message backwards. When we reverse the message, this is what it says.
You come in here and you kill and murder. You pillage and destroy. Your presence was demanded 10 years ago and you didn't show up. 8/8/1995. You were supposed to be here. Why weren't you here? You missed the event. You missed the meeting. You missed the party. You have no right to be here.
From listening to this message, it's pretty clear that our player had missed the Hour of Joy and all of our co-workers ended up dead. It's unclear who was talking in this message, but what's interesting is that some of the lines use the present tense while others use the past tense. In order to grasp an understanding of this message, we need to analyze it. Let's start off with the first line, you come in here and you kill and murder. This line refers to when we returned to the factory, we took down some of the bigger body toys like Huggy Wuggy and Mommy Longlegs. For the next line, you pillage and destroy could relate to how when we took the train and crashed it back in chapter 2. For the next two lines, your presence was demanded 10 years ago and you didn't show up. 8/8/1995. These lines insinuate that we were needed at the factory a decade ago to set things right. Our presence was necessary during the Hour of Joy. We were briefly at the factory, but due to hearing emergency sirens and screaming, we left. Our player was most likely going through some sort of survivor's guilt back then. Moving on to the next two lines, you were supposed to be here and why weren't you here? These lines are saying that we were supposed to be present at the factory while the Hour of Joy was taking place, but we weren't. As stated earlier, due to discovering the true nature of the Bigger Bodies initiative, we were overwhelmed with guilt and regret due to our terrible actions. As a result, we quit and left the factory. However, we would come back to the factory to right our wrongs, but it would be too late. The Hour of Joy would take place, and upon hearing emergency sirens and screaming, we would leave out of fear. Now, let's move on to the next line, you missed the event. You missed the meeting, you missed the party. For the event, this will relate to the Hour of Joy. For the meeting, this could mean that we never got to properly meet the monsters that we helped create through the Bigger Bodies initiative. For the party, this will refer to the prototype's joy of gaining control and influencing the toys to rise up and kill all the employees within Playtime Co. For our last line, you have no right to be here, this could mean that after everything we've done, along with not being present during the Hour of Joy, how dare our player come back to the factory 10 years later to try and fix what should have never happened. So the answer to our question of whether or not our player was present during the Hour of Joy is yes. We were there briefly, but due to the Hour of Joy taking place, we left out of fear. 10 years later, our player will receive an anonymous letter inviting him back to the factory to find the company's staff. This would spark determination within our player to return to the factory in order to atone for their terrible actions and fix everything. Now, let's circle back to where we were talking about our player's name. Before revealing our player's theorized name, we need to talk about a few people who we know aren't our player. We can safely say that the other higher-ups of Playtime Co., Eddie MMR, Leaf Pure, Elliot Ludwig, and Stella Graber are not the player. Due to that, these employees knew about the experiments that were happening within the company. Another person who also falls into the category of not being our player will be Harley Sawyer, as he is the one who presented the Bigger Bodies initiative as a solution to the company's problems. There is a popular theory that Rich is the player due to the fact that he has his own VHS tape within all the current chapters of Poppy Playtime. He is a Playtime co-employee who has anger issues and often complains about the company's bad work management and atmosphere. Although this stresses and angers him, he is still a hard worker and cares about the orphans. This tells us that he's good at heart. While we don't know what Rich's role was in the company, we do know that he worked in shipping as stated in chapter 3. As Rich's character stands, he doesn't seem to possess any information regarding the experiments that are happening in Playtime Co. This is evidenced by this VHS tape, where Rich talks to a superior about how they aren't even allowed to interact with the kids.
I take it you're not a fan of these plays, are you?
Nope, never liked the feel of it. I mean, don't you think these kids deserve some real sunlight instead of floodlights and painted skies? Hell, we're not even allowed to talk to these kids.
So Rich doesn't understand why the orphans are isolated from the rest of the world. He also angrily says that they aren't even allowed to talk to them. There isn't much evidence to suggest that Rich knew about the experiments or that he worked with the kids. When comparing Rich to our player, his personality and reactions don't align with our players. Now that we covered a few people who we know cannot be our player, let's reveal our player's theorized name. We know that our player's first name has to consist of 5 letters and that our last name has to consist of 6 letters. The letters that we have to work with for our name are J, A, H, Y, E, O, I, N, A, B, M. It took several hours, but I managed to come up with a name. Remember, at the end of the day, this is all theory and speculation, so the player's name could be something else entirely. My theorized name for our player is Jamie Boyhan. While the name Jamie is a gender-neutral name, it is more commonly used as a woman's name, and that this has been going on since the late 20th century. So for this theory, our player is a female. As for the last name Boyhan, it means foolish pleasure. This fits our personality well, considering we unknowingly sealed the fates of many orphans who became giant toys due to our research. One thing to keep in mind is that parts of the higher-ups' names have Germanic roots. Just because they follow this principle doesn't necessarily mean that our player's name has to as well. So, Jamie Boyhan was a researcher who worked for Playtime Co. She would conduct a research by observing the orphans and their behaviors from observation rooms in order to collect data. Jamie believes that Playtime Co. is using her research to help the children in the factory, but doesn't know that it's being used for the experiments involving the Bigger Bodies initiative. Jamie would question herself, wondering if her work is truly being used for good. After several successful experiments were created thanks to the data that Jamie collected, Playtime Co. would recognize her competent evaluations, and considering the high success rate of the Bigger Bodies initiative, she would be promoted to the head of production. As the head of production, Jamie would gain high-level clearance to files that were restricted to her back when she was a researcher. Jamie would then discover the true nature of the Bigger Bodies initiative, and seeing how she unknowingly sealed the fates of many orphans, she would regret her actions. She can't bring herself to stay with the company, thus Jamie quits and leaves the factory. However, due to the guilt that harbors within Jamie, she would go back to the factory to right her wrongs. But she would be too late. The hour of joy would be taking place, and while Jamie is there, she can hear emergency sirens and screaming. Out of fear, Jamie would run and leave the factory. 10 years later, Jamie would receive an anonymous letter inviting her back to the factory to find her friends and co-workers. This letter would spark determination within Jamie, and thus she would return back to the factory. Not only would Jamie be able to find out what happened to all her friends and co-workers, but she would be able to atone for her terrible actions and fix everything. Thus, the story of Poppy Playtime would play out to where it currently stands. And with that, this brings us to the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed the theory presented here today. If you guys agree with my theory, or you have any other theories of who you think our player is, feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you guys enjoyed today's video, go ahead and hit the like button down below, as well as subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my videos. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay safe, positive, be there for another, and remember, the grind never stops, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, y'all.